Morning, everybody. Can you hear me all right back there? I'm going to take the silence as a yes. I'm going to try to slow down my usual cadence since this is being translated. So if I sound like I'm a little bit underwater, if you've heard me speak before, it's a conscious effort on my part. First off, I'd like to thank Danny Shin and the organizers for inviting me to participate today. This is a great forum, and I'd like to acknowledge Roberto Silva, Executive Director, ICO, Mr. Andre Ely, CEO, Ely, all the honored guests here. It's a great group, and I hope that we get something accomplished here. It's a big task to identify the paradigm shifts in the coffee industry and develop their countermeasures. So we've only got a day and a half or so to do this, so you guys are going to have to work very hard. I expect you to take notes and forward your suggestions around the table as we go. I'm going to talk about two distinct things here today. One is coffee leaf rust, because I was asked to talk about coffee leaf rust, and because it's an important topic, and because we're still engaged in that battle. And then I'm going to talk about the impacts on specialty coffee in the broader sense and some of the challenges we face. I'm also, first off, grateful to Mr. Ely for the bright colors and the optimism, because there is a lot to be optimistic about in coffee, and there is a bright future for coffee. But I should warn you that most of my presentation is in dark colors, because there are also many things to be worried about in coffee. So we're going to talk a lot about those things that we have to worry about. And then ultimately, I want to talk about what we can do about those things that we have to worry about, because sitting around and worrying about things is probably the least productive activity we can engage in. So I'd encourage us to engage in solving our problems rather than in worrying about our problems. So you'll see this picture a lot, or one like it. Probably seen at least one already today. You'll see more before the day's over, I imagine. This is coffee leaf rust. That is, in fact, the leaf of a coffee tree, of an Arabica plant. And it is, in fact, infected with a fungus. And that fungus is coffee leaf rust. The coffee leaf rust is this species of fungus, the Hemilia vastatrix. There are all kinds of rusts, thousands of rusts on Earth, and all of them have a specific host. So coffee is the host for this particular rust, this particular fungus. But there are rusts in wheat and in corn and in dozens and, well, hundreds really of different agricultural commodities, and this fungus attacks them. And normally, a host and its pathogen develop together over time, and they reach some equilibrium. So if you were to go to the center of origin for coffee, if you go into Ethiopia or South Sudan or northern Kenya, where Arabica coffee evolved, you will find coffee leaf rust, and you will find healthy coffee plants simultaneously. Because of their co-development, they've managed to find a balance where the rust survives on the host, and the host survives in spite of the fungus. Unfortunately, when you take coffee out of its natural environment and away from this co-evolved scenario, coffee is vulnerable and rust is powerful. And it's had a profound impact in places where coffee is cultivated outside of its ancestral home. In particular, recently in Central America. Since the 2012-13 crop cycle, in Mesoamerica, crop losses just in that cycle amount to about $370 million. That's $370 million lost to one of the poorest agricultural sectors in the world. It's not an insignificant loss. At that point, we sort of woke up as an industry and said, hey, this rust is a thing we're going to have to confront. We've lost $369 million. I had the opportunity to participate in a rust forum in Guatemala in May of 2013. And I have to tell you, it was at epidemic proportions for coffee farmers in Central America and Mexico and the Caribbean. and was just beginning to emerge in Peru. And its impacts were devastating. And farmers were terrified, and institutional players were terrified, and the trade was terrified because there was no apparent at-hand solution. What was clear was that we needed to do three things. We needed to provide some immediate relief for farmers who were suffering those losses. We needed to provide some midterm relief with systems that allowed investment in the sector to overcome the needs for renovation, better husbandry, and the sort of adequate care necessary to prevent this disease. And third, it was clear to us that we needed to invest in our future to develop better lines of coffee that are resistant to the disease and yet taste good and provide the kind of specialty products that we want for our marketplace. I love a metaphor. Metaphors are one of my favorite things. And for me, this was somewhat analogous to a scenario where we had somebody who was on fire. And when someone's on fire, the thing they most want is a fire extinguisher. But clearly, you want to have aftercare for somebody who's been on fire and care for fire prevention in the future. And then ultimately, you want to have fire insurance so that if your building does burn down, you can be prepared to meet the economic impacts. So rust was a scenario where, at the moment, we had people who were on fire, and we didn't have very many fire extinguishers. We had even fewer fire prevention programs, and it was fairly clear that we had no long-term fire insurance. So we've tried to come to grips with that. We've tried to provide those things, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. In the 13-14 crop cycle, the one that we are drinking the last of right now, we had more losses. Here are 6 countries in Mesoamerica, and a look at how much of the individual coffee parks, those are numbers in hectares, 60,000 hectares in Costa Rica, 138,000 hectares in Guatemala, 272,000 hectares under coffee in Peru have been impacted by rust in this just past coffee season. Losses were not as steep as they were in the prior season, but they were not insignificant. Honduras suffered mightily. This is the crop just finished. In total, the losses in the 13-14 cycle were 1.7 million bags. Those numbers you saw before, by the way, were quintales, were 100 weights of coffee. In green bags of 60 kilos, 1.7 million bags, essentially all of them washed Arabica, were lost, with an estimated value of about $258 million. This is a lot of money. This is a lot of money. It's a lot of money in particular when you consider the following. You saw a slide up earlier that said there are $19 billion in global transactions in green coffee. $19 billion. That's the value of green coffee at export. Of that, some goes back to the farmer, some goes to intermediation, et cetera, but the total value at export is $19 billion. There are 25 million coffee farmers in the world. If you divide that $19 billion across those 25 million coffee farmers, and you divide their lives by the same 365 days the rest of us occupy in a year, you get a number right around $2. Right around $2 per person per day for coffee farmers. And that's if you make the illogical assumption that all $19 billion goes back to the farmers, because clearly it doesn't. So for a group of smallholder coffee farmers who are surviving, on average, on less than $2 a day, the devastating impact of $370 million in losses in one geography in 1 year, followed by another year of $258 million in losses, is profound. It's profound in the lives of these coffee farmers. And it's not something we can sit by idly and watch happen. We've got to find those fire extinguishers and those fire prevention programs, and ultimately that fire insurance that's necessary to keep this kind of fire from breaking out again. This is what it looks like in total. I gave you 6 countries there. If you look at the total losses to coffee leaf rust in Central America, the Caribbean, and Peru since the 2012-13 crop cycle, we're talking about losses of $700 million. $700 million. And those are losses that were accrued almost exclusively to coffee farmers who live on $2 a day or less. $2 a day or less. That's the scope of the problem. Let's take a look at the current year, the upcoming cycle, the 14-15 crop cycle, and we're going to take a country-by-country look. You notice the color came back to the slides here. Things are a little bit better than they were. Costa Rica has had probably the most successful program of confronting coffee leaf rust, in part because Costa Rica has a strong government support. It has a strong private sector driven institutional partner in Cafe. And there was a clear opportunity to make investments in the nearby remedies that were necessary, access to fungicides, access to equipment, good basic husbandry, a good pruning regimen, access to information, and most importantly, access to finance. And those came together very positively in Costa Rica. So we had good programs with renovation, good programs focusing on these agricultural inputs, excellent training, and overall the incidence of rust has been reduced by over 50% in Costa Rica. And in fact, the focus on the crop again and the access to money, information, and inputs has resulted in a small increase in Costa Rica. For the first time in many years, we look like the Costa Rican crop will be up by about 40 to 50,000 bags. So there's a bright spot amongst this. We have been reacting, we continue to react, and it's having some impact. I should mention that a lot of this has been balanced by nature giving us reasonably good weather that's been helpful in controlling the incidence of rust. Honduras has been a unique beneficiary this year. Cafe, the institutional partner in Honduras, already had a good program of introducing resistant varieties of coffee into the system. So many, many new plantings there under resistant varieties, which weathered the storm quite well. There were also very good agricultural practices generally, and a renewed interest in good husbandry, in pruning, in some cases stumping, and in many cases renovation. Put it all together with good weather conditions, and it looks like Honduras will be up substantially this year, maybe as much as 900,000 bags over the significant losses they suffered in the 12-13 and 13-14 crop years. So it looks very positive for Honduras. More color. Salvador, which suffered mightily in the current crop year, the current year, the 13-14 crop, I guess that's the immediate past crop year now, was devastating for Salvador. Rust was attacked in a massive way, particularly at lower altitudes where the standard high groans are produced. Many old trees in Salvador. The coffee park there, the average age is somewhere around 40 years for trees in the coffee park in Salvador. And those trees not only were hit hard by rust, but hard prunings and stumping ended up resulting in death for a lot of those trees. So the sector suffered quite a lot. On the positive side, there has been good access to agricultural inputs, lots of training, and then an opportunity for the newer trees in the coffee park there to have a better production year. And again, combined with nearly ideal climatic conditions in terms of keeping rust at bay, the impact was for Salvador a recovery of about 375,000 bags. These are estimates, by the way. No guarantees that these will come to pass, and the year's not over yet. That would be for the current crop year. This is not a full recovery from the losses of the past crop year. Things in Salvador are still quite dire. Many people have faced the prospect of having to completely replant their coffee plantations, and in an arena where coffee farmers are very heavily indebted, more so than probably any other Central American country. Salvadoran coffee farmers are highly leveraged. There have been many programs for finance for them over the last 10 years that they've taken advantage of, and they find themselves, in many cases, deeply in debt with loans fully collateralized already by their properties. So the future is uncertain in Salvador over the next few years, and the opportunity to reinvest, introduce more resistant varieties, and continue with the good husbandry of the younger plantings of traditional varieties. So moderate good news this year, remains to be seen for the future. Guatemala also was struck very hard by rust, particularly in western Guatemala, where there are larger concentrations of smallholder farmers. Smallholders in particular, due to the remote nature of their location, their relatively poor access to inputs, poor access to agricultural treatments, poor access to information, suffered tremendously. The organic sector in Guatemala was especially hard hit because the organic treatments for rust that are available are expensive and not nearly as effective as some of the chemical treatments. As a result, Guatemala saw its production diminish considerably, and a lot of that loss in production was in very high quality coffees that were coming out of smallholder arenas in Huehuetenango, Atitlan, and in San Marcos. In the current crop year, great efforts by institutional players there, led by Ana Cafe, substantial investment from donor agencies, financing made available by institutional non-commercial banks as well as by commercial banks, and then tremendous number of private sector activities that have taken place as projects throughout Guatemala have had a really positive impact. And for the first time in 4 years, it looks like we'll see an increase in Guatemala production of about 200,000 bags or so. Keep in mind, this is not returning to the production of the 2010-2011 crop cycle. This is coming back from the lows of the 2013-14 crop cycle. Nicaragua's moderately improved husbandry, weather which has been relatively favorable for keeping rust at bay, not so favorable for growing rice or beans early in the year, but pretty good for rust. And generally high level of investments, particularly from private sector and NGOs, have resulted in Nicaragua reaching some stability. Looking at a potential increase of 25 to 50,000 bags of finished coffee, that number is essentially staying level. But it doesn't look like we'll see particularly devastating losses to rust this year. Peru's a different story. Peru is one of the later countries to be hit by rust in a significant way. The losses in the 12-13 cycle were not nearly as significant as they were in the 13-14 cycle. And it looks like the 14-15 cycle will also be hit very, very hard. Peru's a complicated geography. It's a long way from point to point there. Farmers are very often in very remote areas. There is not a good central institutional partner to work with throughout Peru, as there is in Colombia or in Guatemala or in Costa Rica or Honduras. So coffee farmers struggle. Investments are low, access to finance is relatively low, and structurally it's very challenging to get out to Peru. Husbandry has never been particularly great in Peru, and it continues to be an impediment to recovery from rust. Peruvian farmers have some access to resistant cultivars, but not nearly enough to meet the needs for renovation. And certainly those cultivars are relatively untried in many of the higher altitudes where good Peruvian coffee is produced. Peru will have to be a focus of our attention this year and in future years if we're going to help them escape what will continue to be devastating impacts from rust. For the upcoming crop year, and keep in mind that the current crop year, the 14-15 crop year, we won't see the Peru crop until much later in the calendar year. But early estimates are that we could be down nearly 1 million bags out of Peru. After several years of good growth, Peru's on the decline. And that impact could, as I said, be up to nearly 1 million bags. So what's being done about coffee leaf rust? Well, there are a number of regional programs in Mesoamerica. USAID has a $10 million food assistance program that's designed to help people in Central America and for Central American countries who have been suffering from that loss of $700 million. It's probably worth noting that that loss is not accrued just to farmers, but the people who feel it the most are farm workers, those who don't even have land to farm on but make their living by working for smallholder farmers. They're the first to lose their income in this scenario. And for many of them, the loss of income means the loss of livelihood in its entirety, loss of access to food and to other basic essentials. So there is an ongoing USAID program throughout these 4 Central American countries where they work. In the lending sector, Root Capital, together with Cure Green Mountain, Equal Exchange, and one other coffee company who I've lost for the moment, they'll have to forgive me, have invested in a resilience loan fund of $23 million, which is designed to lend on a long-term basis to smallholder farmers towards renovation, towards new plantings, and towards the capital investment crop to crop that's necessary for basic husbandry. And Proma Cafe, the organization that represents all of the producing country institutions through Central America, the Caribbean, and Peru, has partnered with World Coffee Research and some funding from USAID on a $5 million project on research aimed at developing new solutions for husbandry, as well as driving the development of new cultivars with better coffee leaf rust resistance. So that's the coffee leaf rust picture. That's what they asked me to come and talk to you about today. But I want to talk about something maybe a little more profound, and I'm going to sit down for this because this is one of those conversations we should probably all sit down for. You guys are already seated, so I'm joining you. Plus, there's coffee over here. So, you may ask yourself, why are there tomatoes in this picture? I really want to talk about coffee quality. When we talk about things like coffee leaf rust, we know that one of the answers is to develop varieties that are resistant. And in fact, there are resistant varieties out there today. The greatest number of those resistant varieties, unfortunately, are not the best tasting of the coffees out there. So one of the things we like, one of the things Mr. Ely explored in his talk was connoisseurship, speciality, a distinct flavor difference, those things that we love about coffee, the things that we particularly love about specialty coffee. And a lot of that unique flavor, that unique opportunity for connoisseurship has been driven by underlying materials, underlying coffee cultivars of heirloom varieties, if you will. In the United States, tomatoes are largely a mass-produced activity, and yet they remain the most significant home gardening crop in the country. And the reason why folks in the United States grow lots of tomatoes is because the tomatoes that are available to them in commercial markets don't taste very good. A lot of them look good. They're uniform in size and color, and they're round and shiny, and they look really good, but they don't taste very good. So instead, we focus on growing at home tomatoes of different heirloom varieties that are generally lower yielding and more susceptible to disease and harder to get from the plant to the market. Of course, if you're growing them at home, it's an easy step right from your garden to your kitchen. And those varieties taste better. And this is the problem that we may face in coffee. As we struggle with climate change, as we struggle with successful pathogens, as we struggle with urban pressures, as we struggle with increased labor cost. We're driven to look for, much as tomato farmers have, more effective tomatoes, more effective coffee that's cheaper to grow, that's higher yielding, that ripens uniformly, that is more resistant to disease, that can grow in warmer temperatures. We're looking for all those things. And the caveat, as we try to develop those things, is not to lose the thing that has made coffee so special to us, which is the inherent quality of the coffee bean. So I want you to keep that thought in mind as we talk about the problems facing coffee and how we might solve those problems. Here's the first problem I want to look at: consolidation. In the 2012 crop cycle, 5 countries in the world, Brazil, Vietnam, Indonesia, Ethiopia, and Colombia, produced 70% of the total world production. Just 5 countries accounted for nearly 100 million bags of production. Keep in mind that coffee is commercially cultivated in over 40 countries around the world. And we love that diversity of cultivation for 2 reasons. One, it gives us lots of different kinds of coffee to taste, to enjoy, to experience. We get that taste of place to show up from exotic locales around the world, and that's exciting to us, and it's a driver for our market. The other thing we love about it is it reduces volatility. The more places on earth where coffee is commercially cultivated, the less chance there is that a significant weather event or a social political event or an economic event will impact production in a way that moves the market. Over the last 10 years, we've seen this ongoing trend towards consolidation and away from that diversity in production origin. The result of that is increased volatility in the marketplace. And we are living through a very, very fully realized example of this at this moment in time. We saw prices decline down to nearly the $1 level in this crop year, in this past crop year, and we saw them rebound to above the $2 level. That kind of volatility was driven by a weather event in the world's largest coffee producing country. And as the consolidation of producing countries increases, exposure to this kind of volatility increases dramatically. So consolidation is a threat. It's a threat to the variety of quality, the variety of experience, the variety of taste of place that's so important to our marketplace, towards driving that evolution towards connoisseurship. But it's also an economic threat. So we need to be very concerned about it. Smallholder farmers. "70% of the world's coffee is produced by smallholder farmers. In Colombia, where there are nearly 500,000 smallholder coffee farmers, the average farmer farms coffee on less than 1 hectare of land. And I want to explore a little bit about this. It's a threat to coffee because smallholder farmers are older. Again, in Colombia, the average smallholder is over 55 years old. In many countries around the world, smallholder farmers are hungry or generally plagued by food insecurity. For smallholder farmers around the world, they're facing high costs for inputs, high costs for labor, high costs for every aspect of their farming activity, and often met by very low prices. When the market had plummeted down, when the New York market plummeted down to nearly $1, it was a very untenable scenario for a smallholder farmer. Smallholder farmers are largely disaggregated and don't have access to conventional risk management tools. They're hit by currency fluctuations. As the peso in Colombia got stronger and stronger, farmers' return was lower and lower as their commodity is traded in dollars. And there's really nothing they can do to mitigate that. They have a very difficult time accessing capital. It's hard to get conventional lending into smallholder farmers because they're disaggregated and because traditional lenders see them as a very poor risk. Smallholder farmers are facing the brunt of climate change. Climate change today has largely manifested itself as more and more and more extreme climate events, and smallholder farmers take the brunt of those climate events. Most importantly, perhaps, smallholder farmers increasingly are pessimistic. When you add up all those challenges that they face, it's challenging for them to decide to just push forward in the face of those with no apparent solutions at hand. It's even more challenging for their children, who have been exposed through technology and a constantly shrinking world to how life might be in the world. And so we see the children of smallholders immigrating to urban centers. They invest their risk potential, they invest their energy, they invest their hopes and their dreams and their aspirations into an urban lifestyle rather than into the rural lifestyle of their parents. And I want to tell you that smallholder farmers in coffee are representative of the smallholder agricultural segment worldwide. It's not just coffee smallholders who face all these challenges. These challenges are endemic for smallholder agricultural producers around the world. I do want to tell you that coffee has all these challenges, but as I like to say, at least we're not bananas. To put that in perspective for you, commercial cultivation of bananas in Latin America, primarily for shipment to North America, are dependent not just on one species of banana or one variety of banana. They're almost exclusively dependent on one banana. Bananas are propagated almost exclusively by clonal propagation, and essentially 100% of export quality bananas, the bananas that feed the markets of North America, are the same banana, genetically identical bananas, millions and millions and millions of twins of the same banana. They all come from a single species, a single variety of banana known as the Cavendish, and they are clones of a few Cavendish plants. Cavendish bananas were introduced into Latin America as a result of a plague, not unlike coffee leaf rust, that attacked their predecessor. For many years, commercial bananas in Latin America were clones of a single variety called Gros Michel, or Big Mike in English. And Big Mike was attacked by a fungus known as Panama disease that very nearly wiped out commercial banana production in Latin America. People interested in bananas, scientists in particular, went back to the center of origin for bananas in Southeast Asia, and they found a resistant variety, the Cavendish. And so for the last 50 years or so, almost all of the bananas produced in Latin America for export are this Cavendish banana. I'm sad to report to you that Panama disease has mutated. This fungus has mutated as fungi do. And Cavendish no longer has resistance to Panama disease in the form of Panama disease 2. Scientists are going back to the center of origin looking for another banana that has resistance to Panama 2. So far, the search has been pretty fruitless. So, the future for bananas is pretty grim in Latin America, at least the bananas that North American markets prefer. And bananas and coffee are not alone. In the United States, citrus production, orange production particularly for juice and for fruit oranges, in Florida is threatened by a disease known as citrus greening. So far, no cure for citrus greening has been found, no treatment, no way to eradicate it, and more importantly, no inherent resistance to citrus greening has been found by citrus producers. Citrus greening is extended into Brazil, the next largest producer of oranges for fruit and orange juice into the North American markets. And currently, the situation is quite grim. It seems unlikely that there will be a variety of orange produced that has sufficient resistance to citrus greening to keep the citrus industry in Florida intact. These problems are emblematic not of their particular commodity, not of oranges, not of bananas, not of coffee. These problems are emblematic of a world in which climate change, agricultural monocultures, global economic activation have resulted in a very uncertain and unstable climate to continue with the activities of commodity production that we've pursued for the last 50 years. Things are changing. And in the face of change, we need to implement solutions. I want to turn back a little bit towards bananas and much more importantly towards coffee. Both bananas and coffee are what we call orphan crops. They have a linkage or some cultural heritage to their places of origin. Coffee, if you've ever been to Ethiopia, this would be abundantly clear to you how importantly coffee is linked to its center of origin, how vitally it's linked into the culture and the lifestyle there. If you haven't been to Ethiopia, I encourage you to go. It's a worthwhile trip. But many orphan crops have that profound linkage to their center of origin. In general, orphan crops suffer from having been forced to adapt into agroecological niches and into marginal land. Coffee is a perfect example of this. Coffee was taken out of its home and forced to adapt into subtropical highlands that were in many cases not suitable for any other kind of crop. One of the key indicators for orphan crops is they seldom have a solid or formal seed supply system. And coffee suffers very much from this. There is no seed industry in coffee as there is in so many other crops. And the localized seed industries in most of the world are relatively unregulated, untrained, and unattended to. Certified seeds are very hard to get in most of the world. If you were a coffee farmer in Central America who had the wherewithal to try and renovate your property with new plantings of leaf rust resistant varieties, you would be hard pressed to find certified seeds. And in fact, if you bought seeds in the open market, the chances that they were actually the seeds of disease resistant plants are relatively slim. Orphan crops typically are produced with relatively few external inputs. Again, in Ethiopia, the origin of coffee, it's a given that most of the coffee farming there takes place with very little husbandry and very few external inputs. This is also the case in many smallholder supply chains throughout Latin America and throughout East Africa and throughout Indonesia. Inputs are expensive, relatively scarce, and challenging to deliver to farmers, and they're risky in the face of high price volatility. Another common issue for orphan crops is that they receive relatively little attention from research. They tend to have relatively small extension services, and policy decision makers, donors, technology providers often don't take a lot of interest in those products. Coffee certainly suffers from this. Coffee research, basic research into the fundamentals of coffee, agronomically, from basic scientific research, from development of new cultivars, etc., has been a limited activity and almost completely constrained within national boundaries to the activities of national research centers. There has not generally been a worldwide approach to solving the problems of coffee from a research standpoint. Extension services, which have never been especially strong in coffee, are increasingly under attack from an economic outlook that suggests that private sector will solve all problems. Policymakers have been able to turn their eye away from coffee in geographies where coffee is a less important part of the national economy. Consumers are finally waking up to coffee as an interesting origin product, and maybe waking up just in time to help us reverse this orphan crop trend. And finally, many orphan crops are highly nutritious and have medicinal properties. Coffee clearly is starting to be a leader in this concept of medicinal properties for a beverage that's otherwise not a functional food. What does all that mean? Well, here's the thing I want to focus on. We have no formal seed supply system. And the reason this is important is because if we can find the wherewithal to develop new varieties of coffee that have disease resistance, that taste good, unlike those commercial tomatoes, that are attractive to farmers from an economic standpoint, that can survive in the face of increasingly variable climate scenarios, if we can find those, if we can invest to find those varieties, to drive the breeding programs necessary for that, we will still be severely limited in how we can disseminate those products out to smallholder farmers. When you start to think about planting densities of roughly 3,000 plants per hectare, and you look at the millions of hectares under coffee, it's a challenging scenario to imagine getting seeds or plants out to in the quantities necessary to take advantage of what research we do manage to do. I want to talk a little bit about this organization. World Coffee Research is a relatively new organization. It's a 501c5, and it's dedicated towards fostering scientific research to help us address all the problems we've just expounded on, particularly along the lines of developing new coffee breeding programs that will deliver to us cultivated varieties of coffee that taste good, are disease resistant, are well adapted to their geography, that can return at a reasonable rate for farmers, and that can be adaptable to a warming planet, to changing weather patterns, and to increasing volatility in climatic events. It's a relatively unique thing. World Coffee Research is entirely industry funded and governed. So all the money that supports World Coffee Research today comes from folks on the consuming side of the coffee equation, mostly roasters, mostly in the specialty end of the business. But it includes folks like Green Mountain Keurig Coffee, it includes folks like Ely Coffee, it includes folks like S&D Coffee and Smuckers in the US, it includes small companies like Intelligentsia in the US, and Counterculture, and Union Hand Roast in the UK. It's a broad coalition of folks interested in the future of coffee. It's an open source platform. The solutions that come out of the work of World Coffee Research are available for everybody in coffee. It has a focus on capacity building in developing the capacity of institutional partners in producing countries to carry on research through educational exchanges, through a university footing in the US land-grant university system, and in a focus on conducting the research in origin environments rather than in consuming environments. And perhaps most unique, World Coffee Research has a quality orientation. So unlike many other commodity research platforms, which are largely focused on disease resistance, economic viability, yields, etc., inherent in the World Coffee Research platform is a focus on quality. It goes back to our belief that coffee is interesting for much of the world because it tastes good. Clearly, it doesn't have any nutritional value, and while it may have some health benefits, great tasting coffee, we believe, is the key to our future. This is one of those slides that you can't really see, and I just put it up there just to show you that somebody does this kind of work here. But this is sort of the function of World Coffee Research. This is the work that World Coffee Research is undertaking right now. And I might distill it down to the following. The current activities are looking at the broadest slice of the genetic diversity in Arabica coffee, narrowing the breeding pool down to include the largest possible diversity, marrying it with the successful commercial cultivars currently in the marketplace, and developing a breeding program that's designed to increase diversity, increase the possibility of disease resistance, increase the possibility of unique flavor profiles, increase the possibility of higher yields, while at the same time maintaining the advantageous properties that we already find in commercial cultivars around the world. Why do I show you this slide? Well, I want to talk about World Coffee Research as one solution, but not as the only solution, as the thing that we need to do next in coffee. World Coffee Research will continue to expand its scope on research, but we'll add, as it moves forward, a development aspect that's designed to help coffee farmers take advantage of the work that happens there. We'll certainly start to look at a broader sustainability interface and really start to try to understand how research functions along with development and along with the private sector in developing long-term solutions to this litany of problems that I've just outlined for you. Activities like World Coffee Research represent our best hope. They're collaborative, they're open platform, they recognize the partnership between institutions and businesses, between institutions and governments, between institutions and other institutions. This kind of work is clearly what we need, not just for coffee, but for many, many, many value chains that are faced by the same challenges of constrained resources, climate change, increasingly frequent climate events, and an expanding population on a static bit of land. I've put the web address for World Coffee Research in there in case you want to find out more about it. It's just one solution, and I want to talk about it in the form of one solution, but I also want to explore some of the other solutions, and I want to encourage you all, as you go back to your day after this rather depressing presentation, to have a little bit of optimism about what's possible, because we can solve these problems together. They're not impossible problems, but it does take some effort. So how do you get involved? How do you become a part of the solution? Well, first and foremost, assuming that many or not most of you are from the private sector, I would encourage the following for you. Go about your business. Pursue your business with energy, with enthusiasm, with an eye towards creating a sustainable business in the long term. But do it with a backdrop of a commitment to an ethical business model, towards looking at the entire value chain, towards participating, whether that participation is by attending a conference like this one, whether that participation is joining a coffee association nationally or internationally, whether that participation is becoming a donor or a leverager of donor funds through activities like Root Capital, whether it means becoming a donor to World Coffee Research through their checkoff funding program, whether it means being an active participant in either your local coffee institution or in a national or international coffee institution. Don't forget that that collaboration is critical to our mutual success. How else can you get involved? World Coffee Research, I mention it because it's an organization that I think is critical, a linchpin organization here, but they need funding as well. Their funding is entirely from the industry, and the easiest way to do that is to contribute through your purchases of good quality coffee. There are many other activities that you can also get engaged in. USAID operates a Feed the Future program that has a special private sector engagement hub that allows you to leverage your coffee purchases into programs that help sustain coffee farmers through the lean months, that help to build programs that will encourage diversity, that will allow farmers to become self-sufficient. And most of all, I encourage you to get engaged with each other. If you're in a geography that doesn't have a coffee institution, think about starting one. If you want to expand past your local, regional, or national boundaries, join an international coffee institution. It's a little self-serving, but as a representative of one, I encourage you to be a member of the Specialty Coffee Association of America, or the Specialty Coffee Association of Europe, or the Specialty Coffee Association of Japan, or any of the organizations that are working collaboratively to try to address these solutions. And most profoundly of all, I encourage you to look outside of the immediate needs of your business to grow and to be profitable, and to consider the needs of all the businesses that make up the coffee value chain, to share in that. So when you make your coffee purchases, it's not a question of price. It's a question, as Mr. Ely so aptly put it, of value. And value is made up of so many things. It's made up of the inherent quality of the product. It's also made up of the livelihoods of the people that produce it, the appeal to consumers, and its fit into the overall ethical nature of global trade. So I encourage you, whatever system of ethics you embrace, stick to it, believe in it, practice it. Don't be sucked in to an ethics of price, but keep your values consistent with value. Thanks.